Coming up on the live and interactive ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, Edgar and I will get you all of your latest news and information from the state capitol and CDE with an in-depth analysis on how it impacts you. Plus, we're back talking the budget, but we've got a budget specialist on the show. Assemblymember David Alvarez is with us to talk about what's happening in the state capitol and what you can expect through the budget process.
The ACSA Legislative Lunch Break starts now.
And we welcome you on a Wednesday to the live and interactive ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, along with Dr. Edgar Zazwata, ACSA's Executive Director. I'm Naj and Edgar, ACSA's Senior Director of Marketing and Communications. Welcome. We are honored to have you with us today. Go ahead and jump onto the chat and say hello and let us know where you're watching from. Edgar, how are you?
I'm good, Naj. I'm excited. I got excited here, even just as in your intro and introducing, we'll have more to say about the Assembly member, but Assemblymember David Alvarez. And when I hear that, it always brings me a lot of pride. David and I go back to our early legislative days, and I've kind of seen his journey. And so, yeah, it just that never gets old when I just hear that introduction. He's doing big things, and now we have him here on the show. So I'm always excited about our guests,
Right.
Some more than others. We won't, but today's a good one. So I'm excited for the conversation.
Hey, I'm just excited. I'm excited that I get to introduce a fellow Aztec, a fellow San Diego State alum onto the show today. I rarely get to do that, so I'm very excited about that opportunity. Neri Pais, our good friend, first on the chat today. Barbara Wilcox, Ellen Wheeler with us as well. We got a couple of news items for you, and then we'll bring on Assemblymember David Alvarez to talk about the budget process. There's so much going on. We're seeing so many different numbers out there, Edgar. So looking forward to hearing what he has to say. First, I want to refer to this PPIC report on homelessness, Edgar. And I think it's important for us to kind of put into context pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, and the numbers that we're seeing, and maybe some of the challenges that have come. Now, this is a report from the Public Policy Institute of California on student homelessness. The numbers, according to this PPIC report, are going backwards. Recent cumulative enrollment data indicates at least 4.1% of California students experienced homelessness at some point during the 2022-2023 school year. And for context, that's nearly 250,000 students here in the state of California, if my math is correct. This brings us back to pre-pandemic levels from 2017 to 2019. We had 4.1 to 4.3% of students experience homelessness during the pandemic, Edgar. That number shifted to 3.7%. The report indicates the impact of the cost of living, the expiration of some of those housing protections that existed during the pandemic itself. Those have led to some of this number fluctuating, also declining enrollment. Those numbers, I mean, we had what we had before the pandemic. Pandemic impacted everything. Now we're seeing the numbers now. Certainly some concerning numbers as we've gone back up.
Yeah, and I mean, you hit on the head. I mean, this was an issue before. And like so many, I find that we have this conversation a lot. Things that were an issue before COVID-19, it's not like COVID-19 created it, just it perpetuated, exacerbated the problem, right? And I think homelessness in general, I think there's probably not a community in the state now that isn't being challenged with this growing epidemic in itself, right? Just I know it's one of the main topics for the policymakers across the street about what do we do as a state. Now, when it comes to students, it's even a more acute problem because, frankly, if you don't have housing security, how can we ask these students to excel and give us their best in the academic environment? So it's something that our educators are seeing firsthand. They've been dealing with this, but talk about students that need more support with these challenges. I mean, this is a concerning number. It's a concerning number when we just look at homelessness in general. Now, couple that with some of these more vulnerable students, I think it's good that the PPIC is putting some spotlight on this issue.
Yeah, let me bring up one other one, and we're going to shift focus for the moment on what's happening at the Capitol, because We're going to bring on a California legislature in just a few moments, but I want to bring some attention to this bill that's been introduced that would guarantee paid pregnancy leave for teachers and for school staff of up to 14 weeks. Now, the story comes from our good friends over at EdSource. According to this article, the bill, which is co-sponsored by the Legislative Women's Caucus, would give employees full pay if they miss work because of a pregnancy, a miscarriage, termination of pregnancy, or recovery. According to the article, teachers are currently exempt from paying into or benefiting from state disability insurance. They can take unpaid maternity leave, but most use vacation. The article says in 2019, this will just take us back a few years pre-pandemic. The article says in 2019, Governor Newsom vetoed a similar bill because it would have given teachers and school staff 6 weeks of fully paid maternity leave. But the impetus of the veto, according to this article, was the cost for school districts and for colleges. So we'll see what happens with that inside the state capitol during this legislative session. Okay, Edgar, you and I have talked a lot over these last few weeks, these past 6 weeks, really, about the budget. The Legislative Analyst's Office predicted a very large $60 billion deficit. When the governor released his budget proposal, his numbers, Department of Finance numbers, were different. That was closer to $30 billion deficit. Now, the governor came up with a mechanism. We talked with Megan about this last week to keep public education whole. But last week, the LAO recommended rejecting the Newsom plan. Instead, the recommendation was to pull more money from the Prop 98 Rainy Day Fund and reject the COLA. Just before we bring on our guest, Edgar, it caused a ripple effect. What we heard from the LAO, those recommendations, you've been talking to so many of our stakeholders statewide. Was there angst? Did you get the feeling that there was angst among those that you spoke with?
There was already angst.
Yeah.
So I think I think the numbers last week just increased the situation, right? I think folks know that this is a very different fiscal landscape, as we're going to hear from the Assembly member, and now it's in their, the ball's in their court, if you will. And I think people are just bracing themselves. Luckily, there's a lot of positives in terms of some of the safety mechanisms that we didn't have in the past. But yes, I think bracing ourselves for what's to come is the commonality here in the field.
Yeah, well, let's go ahead and bring on one of those key decision makers in the state capitol as we move forward on education financing. Assemblymember David Alvarez is from Assembly District 80, pride of San Diego State University. Assemblyman, so honored to have you with us here on the live and interactive ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, your first time with us. Just to kind of set this up, our viewers are from throughout the state. Obviously, they know you over in AD 80, but many of them do not know much about you. Can you start by sharing a little bit about yourself and your path to the legislature?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for the invitation. It's really great to join you and find a fellow Aztec. There's a few of us up in the Capitol, and it's always nice to find one. Very proud to be a San Diego State University alum. And very proud to be an alum of the Capitol Fellows Program along with Edgar. So we've got a connection here. And then we were actually colleagues working for a legislator in the 2000s. And so it's been really great to be able to reconnect with Edgar, and really looking forward to this conversation. But yeah, I am born and raised here in San Diego. In fact, the only time I was never living here was during my fellowship year 20 years ago now. And I am a son of immigrants who came to this country with that American dream of providing a better opportunity for their kids. I'm an English learner, come from a very poor background. My parents never had even a first grade education. The first in my family to go to college. Definitely dealt with a lot of the issues that your districts, all of you are dealing with now. One, I was in my senior year. I don't share this story very much because the severity of homelessness is so much more today than it was in those days. But my senior year in high school, I had to go and live with a friend while my parents lived with my sister, because the home that we lived in was sold and we didn't have a place to live. And so, I have a little bit of that lived experience. Luckily, again, I had amazing support system, so it worked out okay. But for 8 months there in my senior year, that was my situation. And then a couple of my siblings who spent time in the criminal justice system. So a lot of I think issues that a lot of our families face today are some of the issues that I faced growing up. And so I'm just blessed now to be in a position to give back in this way. And I've served in public office before. I was a staff member to a legislator before, but now I get to really focus on these issues and try to bring that experience that I have from a primarily urban district, but a border district with a different dynamic with students that are different in this part of the state than they are in others. But certainly looking forward to learn about all the issues throughout the state to make sure that education continues to be the one and only, not only, but one of the main factors for opportunity and success for Californians, because that's the only way I was able to get to where I am today. It was my public education and the investments that were made in me. Whether you talk about bilingual education programs, or you talk about music programs, or you talk about counselors in our high school system that helped me get through high school and apply to college, all those systems that were in place are so critical. And my story could not be told without our public education system and obviously our educators. So I'm just really lucky to be now in a position to continue to provide those opportunities for future generations. That's how I envision this.
Assemblyman, I know yesterday I was listening to the budget. Well, I'm not gonna lie, I wasn't listening to the budget hearing. I know members of our team were listening to the budget hearing,
Man,
but I did hear. I did appreciate, that connection, that just similar to what you just talked about, telling your story, in a very public format, as Maria Thompson there is mentioned. That's always powerful because it's a connection to the kids that our members are serving. So many of us that grew up very similar to you. I think it's a sense of pride for all of us. On that note, congratulations on the appointment to the chair. I'm glad you haven't changed your mind, and said, maybe I don't want to do this. You coming in now, we're facing a pretty big deficit, right? It's not going to be an easy task, as you're going to have all the different sectors of the education community coming to you, with very legit perspectives there on what the impact is. But with that said, obviously we know it's not an easy year coming up. What's going to be your approach in leading this committee and really building a budget given the circumstances that have been presented to you?
Yeah. And, Edgar, you and I were staff members in the last Great Recession for a chair of the budget. And we saw how devastating those times were, particularly to our schools, but to a lot of our public systems, but our schools, where year after year after year, pink slips were issued on the March 15th deadline. And I'll tell you, that never left me. For the last, it's now been over 15 years, I've always thought about the March 15th deadline, whether I was doing education policy, which I didn't for a whole decade. I wasn't working on these issues or not, because I think that helped contribute to a lot of the deterioration of sort of the aspirational of becoming an educator, becoming a teacher, because who would want to get into that profession when you knew that just around the corner you might get a pink slip, right? And so that sort of sentiment has never left me. And I think that's what I bring to this position. I really want to focus on making sure that cuts are kept away from the classroom, so that the teachers who have dedicated themselves, who have been working over the course of years to really build that the school community or to build up their focus and attention to kids, that we don't jeopardize that, because that's what's going to lead us to make progress in the long term, not the turnover that unfortunately we saw back then. And so I bring that perspective. You asked about what perspective that. I'm also emboldened by the fact that our Speaker of the Assembly has been very clear from his statements, and then I can share comfortably in personal conversations, that we need to look seriously at all of our programs. We need to be very accountable, and we need to do a lot of oversight of what we've done, what we've funded. There have been a lot of really great investments and great ideas over the last several years, in particular when there was a lot of money, but we don't have that kind of situation now. And so we need to really dig deep into what are the programs that are working, what's delivering results, what is creating student access and student outcomes. And that is really the lens or the filter, if you will, upon which we'll be reviewing everything. And we have, I believe it's 16 hearings in the education subcommittee. It is probably the most certainly in a long time. And we're going to be going almost as they did back in the day. And you remember, Edgar, the conference committee line item, but line item, do we want to keep this? What is this doing? How is it serving? Do we want to continue? Do we want to grow this program? Or is this something perhaps in a year like this might not be as critical?
Folks, if you have a question for Assemblymember David Alvarez, go ahead and put those into the chat. We'll try and tackle some of those at the end of our broadcast. Assemblymember, how do you balance responding to the significant budget deficit with not hurting schools and compromising all of the great investments that the state has made over the past few years?
And that's where also, if folks are going to ask questions or in the chat, I really invite this, because one of the reasons I wanted to do this was not just because you have two great hosts, but also because I've been trying to spend a lot of time talking to real practitioners who have implemented programs, who are going to be dealing with the impacts of whatever we decide to do. I've already met with all of our superintendents. I'm meeting with our school board leadership, trying to also meet with all of our instructional leadership and obviously other staff and support staff to sort of get a sense of what on the ground is happening. I want to hear on, literally, we're going to be discussing every single program. We're going to be talking about extended learning opportunity programs. We're going to be talking about the reading programs. We're going to be talking about community schools and what that's allowed schools to do. We're going to be talking about the initiatives that the governor has put forward on green buses and whether that's being deployed and if districts are actually utilizing this. So that's just literally a very short list of all of the programs that we're going to be looking at. And so what I'm interested in is certainly in hearing from people as to on the ground, how is this working? How does it need to be tweaked? And we want to know how some of the, for example, expiring resources from the federal government or from the state from the pandemic that really help support particular programs that are going away. What impact is that going to have on a school district and on the school being able to provide access and true outcomes for students? So it's at this moment and through the hearings, it's really intended to be a listening session for the public, but also really dissecting the initiatives from the past and any new initiatives that the administration is proposing.
David, on that note, I know echoing, we just came out of a meeting with actually some of the chief business officials from around the state, some of them from your district there, and we're asking about this very much. The LAO put out their report and got a lot of attention, and we had to remind everybody, the LAO plays a very important role in this process. Ultimately, it's the legislature that's going to have to grapple with what those decisions mean, more politically, but also in practice. What does that mean? I think the one question we got so much, and they were bombarding the representatives from the DOF, from Department of Finance, and from the legislative office, is about two recommendations in particular. One, proposing to not fund a COLA, right? To have going a completely different direction, and then two, maybe draining or going more deeper into the rainy day fund on the Prop 98 side. Any immediate reaction from yourself or your colleagues just to the recommendations that have been put out there?
Yeah. So yesterday in our hearing, which you missed out on, you should have actually. We did talk about this specifically on the utilization of the reserves. The LAO has one approach to that. Department of Finance is taking another approach. And the administration is proposing what they finally coined yesterday, I'm blanking, but some people have called the maneuver. The cost shift is what they're referring to as now. This cost shift of the 22-23 that we overfunded schools by a tune of, I believe it was $7 billion, maybe a little more than that, about $8 billion actually. And so now that we have the real numbers, we know that we overfunded. We budgeted too much given what we had. And so there's two different ways to look at how do we correct that. We didn't have money that we've already spent. And one thing I should make really, really clear, I think it already is, but I think it's like there's some distinctions here. Nobody is talking about going back and taking back any expenditures that were made in 22-23. So for our cheap CBOs and for our school districts, we don't want there to be this sort of uncertainty of, are they going to claw that money back that they already gave us and that we already spent? That is absolutely not what is, from anybody's perspective, LAO, governor's proposal, or I think the legislature. I have heard that very loud and clear. What we are looking at, and I think people should be very cognizant of, is we are looking at unspent funds. There are a lot of programs that the state has not really deployed. They have not, in some instances, put out even the request for qualifications or proposals or whatever gets put out by the department in order to apply for those funds. And some of those were in year 22-23. Some of them were in the current year. I would be very, very cautious, and I've said this publicly, and I think this is certainly the sentiment from the assembly anyway, in counting on any of those funds as potential future funds as you go through your budgeting process. Those are probably very unlikely, and so I wanted to sort of separate and distinguish those two.
There is a comment over here, David, that I just want to refer to.
Sure.
And have you give some feedback on. This is from Laura Dutch. She says, please remember the value of adult education. We are working hard to support adult learners in reaching their goals of learning English, gaining citizenship, finishing high school, and workplace entry. I know that there's so many programs out there that rely so much on every single penny to be able to make these programs work. Adult education, certainly one of them.
I want to say thanks to Laura for raising that. Adult education is always a segment of education that we often just overlook. And in a year like this, where the impacts are so big to K through 12, to community colleges, and to our higher education segments, mainly speaking obviously of UC and CSU, our two state systems, we tend to focus our attention on that. So I appreciate, being reminded that adult education has a purpose to serve. In some districts, it's through the unified districts or the school districts. In some instances, it's through the community college systems. I know we've got a variety of that here in San Diego. So I appreciate you saying that. I promise you, and this is why we're doing these conversations, I want to go back and check in on that and see what we're doing this year on that front.
Assemblymember, before I ask you the next question, I'll just note the comment there from Paul Myers that Prop 98 is supposed to be a minimum guarantee. I know folks get, there's been this conversation of overfunding schools, and I know this is a sentiment we hear a lot. Frankly, we share that, Prop 98 is supposed to be the minimum guarantee and shouldn't be considered overfunding. But I know that's one of the pieces that the legislature is going to tackle there. In terms of just switching gears for a second, so you spoke, and I really appreciated you sharing some of that story, some of it that know you personally, and that it really is part of your why you're doing this work. But you do come from a unique part of the state. I always love hearing the perspectives from our members from that border region about what they're facing, what their students are facing. What would you say are the primary needs facing your students, your community? And then also one important piece, because I think even us in the education sector have to be reminded sometimes that you're dealing with all aspects of the budget, and that, they're all impacting those individuals, those community, healthcare, housing, so what would you say is the landscape, and how does that really frame your perspective moving forward in making some of these decisions?
Yeah. Before I answer that, I do want to acknowledge Paul's comment, because I think that's really important. I think those of us who value education is probably the most important thing that the state can do. Certainly don't think we're ever overfunding it, right? It's more of a technicality that with Proposition 98 and how the calculations work and how lingo that gets used, or the language to describe it, you true up or you rebench or you sort of figure out exactly how much money you had and you budgeted, more. And by the way, it wasn't just in education. We budgeted more everywhere. It was erroneous because of a variety of reasons, primarily because the taxes weren't due with enough time. So we didn't have a really good grasp on what the numbers were going to be. So that's when people maybe mention the word overspending or overfunding, it's more of a technical term than it is really what we believe is important in terms of the investments. As far as the region that I represent, I'm at the very south end of the entire state of California. We have really unique circumstances, but I think they're not that unique. We have a lot of students, interestingly, that live on the Mexican side of the border. We have 150,000 people who cross every single day the border, the majority of them to work. they've decided to move themselves or their families to Tijuana, to Baja. One, because it's so close to San Diego, and I can't stress how close it is. It's literally where I'm right now in my district office here in San Diego, and I'm 10 minutes away from the border. My house is only 15 minutes away. So we're really, we believe of ourselves as a region because we have this fluidity of 150,000 people every single day. Again, families who've moved down there. But why? It's become so expensive to live in San Diego. All of California for sure, but San Diego continues to be grab headlines as like the most expensive, second most expensive, third, always in the top 5 most expensive regions in the entire country. And so we've had this dynamic of people who can't afford to live here anymore. In other parts of the state where people can't move, they move out of state, or oftentimes, unfortunately, we've seen the homelessness numbers, which you just referenced, right? Because of the cost of living. We have a safety net, and that's Tijuana. It's more affordable to live there, but then people have to make that journey on a regular basis. So that's like one aspect of my district that's a little bit different than other parts of the state, but certainly English learners still dominate. The level of socioeconomic levels are still relatively modest and low, with few exceptions of my district, not very wealthy areas. And so those bring the challenges that they bring. How do we keep a workforce that can afford to live here when it's so expensive to live here? And we got to make sure that we are have the right compensation for teachers and staff and everybody else. So we're not too different from the rest of the state with that one uniqueness of where we are geographically.
I want to make mention of this this question that's coming from Ellen Wheeler. She says, you mentioned reading. One of your members has put forward a bill supporting the science of reading. Do you think this is the year the legislature and governor will work to implement this effort?
Yeah, thanks, Ellen. This is, I think, going to be a really important question. I do think that there will be some very serious discussions, and potentially this is the year to act. The pandemic sort of created a pause in a lot of conversations on reform because the numbers were just so unique. But now that we've been out of it, we are seeing some data points that continue to demonstrate that when it comes to reading comprehension, the trend is not in the right direction yet. We have to acknowledge science, a lot of research and scientific evidence about the science of reading, as referred to, that demonstrates that that seems to work. I will just tell you, as an English learner myself, where I have a little bit of pause, and I think I've expressed this with the author of this bill, is that we have to be really, really careful about not misdiagnosing, not applying the right tools to students who are English learners, because we know that in the past, those students have been left behind and they have not benefited from reforms that are well-intentioned. And so that's the one area where I'm sort of making my voice heard in this conversation of science of reading.
David, to close out, kind of one of the things I always appreciate, especially some folks that, you haven't been here as long, so you kind of see that perspective of how your life has changed being now, a legislator. And one thing I'm always just curious about, as folks have gone from other professions, or even you had an elected office, but in this new setting, maybe one thing that surprised you about the job, whether good or bad, and then maybe the least glamorous part of being a state legislator. If you want the
least glamorous, let me start with the least glamorous, which I'm always sort of a half full kind of person, and I've turned what is the least glamorous certainly into trying to maintain my balance. So I'm a father of 2. My wife and I are raising our kids who are a middle schooler going into high school and a 4th grader, and that is by far the most difficult part of the job. So maybe it's not so not glamorous in the fact that I get to fly. Like, I flew to Sacramento Monday, flew home yesterday. Sometimes I fly back to Sacramento today. So I fly 4 times a week in order to be able to be with my family as much as possible when I'm not having in capital requirements, but I'm in my district office doing meetings here with constituents. So you might think flying is glamorous. When you have to do it 4 times a week, it is not as glamorous.
No.
But it's part of, wanting to be really present with my kids as they're also growing into being, young adults. And the most surprising thing, because I think that was the first question, I think the most surprising thing is that we often, there are a lot of legislators who may not have full-time legislative experience in the past. And I think I really underestimated that. I just assumed like everybody will have like a lot of experience either in legislative, or some people do like in their industry, their business, or their profession. But elected experience on a full-time basis that sometimes really requires, it's not just like the basics of like having staff and managing staff, but really maximizing your ability to create amazing change in the state of California because of the position that we are honored to have. And so really utilizing that to make and effectuate change that is positive for the constituents that we represent. I think some people maybe are caught like unexpectedly finding themselves with all of this, and perhaps it takes them a little bit while longer to figure out how to really run on all cylinders. And but there's just an amazing opportunity to create so much change. And you do hear about the complaints about legislators introducing too many bills. You know, I do introduce quite a bit, but they're very focused on like issues that are happening in my district and how do we connect it to statewide policy. And so I do think you can effectuate tremendous change if you are focused in that way. And I think one of the other advantages, again, of me having this commitment to my family is that I know I have a limited time during the week and during the day. So I've got to be really focused and really on top of it. But I also got a limited time because even though I'm just starting now, I can only do this for, the next 10 years. And that sounds like a long time, but things in the Capitol, and especially, dynamic change and significant change, like on the issue of science reading, doesn't happen overnight or in 1 year.
Now, David, just so you know, Edgar's former superintendent, when he was going to school, often sends in photos of him back in the day so we can have a good time with that. The next time you come on, there you go. See, there's one right there. See, the next time you come on, you've got to come in with a really great Edgar story from when you guys were younger.
Oh, I have one.
If you've got one, we've got the time. What do you got for us?
No, I don't have it with me, but I do have one.
Okay.
Well, we still printed pictures. Remember 20 years ago?
Yeah.
Nobody prints pictures anymore. No.
Well, then the next time you come on, I'm please bring all of the ammo you have to give Edgar a hard time. Assemblyman David Alvarez from Assembly District 80 in San Diego. Thank you, sir, very much for being with us today, and we look forward to having you next time.
It's been great. Thank you, guys.
Good seeing you, dude.
Take care.
And folks, if you like what you see here on the live and interactive ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, we invite you to join us by subscribing to us or liking us. If you subscribe to us on YouTube, you like us on Facebook, you'll get instant alerts when Edgar and I are going to come on with breaking news. And then, of course, a weekly reminder of when we're coming on the air. And if you have great stories to tell in your school district, we want to tell those stories as well. Go ahead and send in your news releases, your photos, your bullet points to our great EdCal editor, Michelle Carl, mcarl@axa.org. Also, want to remind you that coming up next month is our Lead with Pride Summit that's happening in Anaheim. It's an event you don't want to miss. Take a look. And that is our ACSA Lead with Pride Summit, March 17th through 19th in Anaheim. You can register axa.org/lead with pride. I will be there, so definitely come out and say hello. Edgar, are you going to be there?
I will be there. Wouldn't miss it, of course.
Perfect. That'll be 3 years. 3 years for this great
summit. It's a good one. It's for those that have not attended, of all the conferences we put on, just the energy, the vibe, the love, frankly, just this spirit of not just within the attendees, but this whole spirit of trying to be better for our students.
Yeah.
I think really permeates across that gathering.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun, great energy. We hope you register for that. Until then, folks, thank you so much for joining us here on the live and interactive ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. Remember, we are live and interactive Wednesdays here on ACSA Facebook and ACSA YouTube. Have a great rest of the day and rest of the week, and we'll see you next time.